Bitcoin is going to $100 million, whether you like it or not, whether you accept the fact that it's going to $100 million or not, because there are always going to be more dollars printed. And at some point, they're going to find their way into Bitcoin. In this video, I want to go into this in depth. Let's get started. The very first thing that I want to start with is this post from Barchart. You can see here, breaking US banks. US banks are now sitting on $395 billion of unrealized losses as of Q2 2025. So they probably have a bunch of securities, a bunch of bonds that they're holding, and the real value of them has fallen because interest rates have increased so much. So you can see here in 2006, 2007, 2008, this is the amount of unrealized losses they had. And then they went to positive, and they went to positive. And now you can see there's a massive difference between what's happening here versus what's happening here. And these numbers are only going to get worse over time. It's not like they're going to get better. These numbers are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And what's going to happen? You're going to see that the US government steps in and they're going to allow these banks to get out of this by printing more and more money. They're going to have either banks that buy them, they're going to fund them in some way, they're going to get bailed out, or they're going to get bailed in with your money. Here's another post that kind of describes something similar, but in a different way. So you can see here, the amount of Bitcoin is very limited. The orange, the light orange at the bottom here is the amount of Bitcoin that's already been created. The black triangle, that tiny black triangle at the bottom, is the available amount of Bitcoin. On the other hand, there are trillions and hundreds of trillions of dollars that are available to go into Bitcoin. So you can see here at the top, there is no limit to how much capital there is. This amount of capital is going to keep rising because the US government can borrow as much money as it wants to. The Federal Reserve can print more money to buy US government bonds. And the Federal Reserve will probably at some point step in to buy this debt that the banking system is holding on to. And how are they going to do that? They're going to print more and more money. They're going to print more and more money, and they're going to dump it into the economy. And that money will find its way into Bitcoin. You can see here, this is from July 2nd, 2025. Capital is infinite. There is no limit to how much money can exist because the money that we use is fake. The money that we use isn't real. Here's another graphic that shows you exactly what I'm talking about here. Out of the world's $90.4 trillion money supply, only 8% is physical. It's only 8% of it is physical cash and coins. So that's maybe $9 trillion, $8 trillion maybe. That's the only part that's physical cash. And that means that everything else can just be printed. They can create it out of nothing. It can be created using spreadsheets and databases. And they don't really have to print anything. They just create it, they hand it over to other people, and those other people get to spend it. And what happens when they spend it? What they're doing is they're competing with goods and services that you may need to survive. So they can buy houses with that money. They can buy food with that money. They can buy cars with that money. They can buy labor with that money. So what's happening here? More and more money is being printed. Fake money is being created and added to the economy. It's being dumped into the economy. And your cost of living is going up because there's a limited number of goods that are available while there's an unlimited number of dollars. So as the number of dollars keeps rising and rising, the people who are competing for those goods can buy them at higher and higher prices because they don't really have a cost of goods, because the money that they're getting is basically free. They don't have to think about the opportunity cost. They can go to a bank and they can have more money printed out of thin air. The people who own houses today, the people who own stocks today, they can go to a bank and the bank will create more money for them out of thin air so that they can spend it on whatever they want to. And this is how the economy works. This is quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is where interest rates are decreased, so people are incentivized to borrow more and more money. Then there's quantitative tightening, which happens after the market gets the economy gets too hot. Quantitative tightening is where interest rates go up. So quantitative easing is meant as a measure to get people to spend money, to create consumers, to get people to have an incentive to go to the bank, borrow money, and buy things because the interest rates are so low. So what they're doing here is with quantitative easing, they're decreasing the value of the future and they're getting you to consume today because they're increasing the value of the present. When you discount the future too much, the present becomes way more valuable because what's the point of waiting if you know for a fact that if you keep your money in your bank account that money is going to be worth less and your money represents the labor that you put in the past. So what's happening here is banks are convincing people to spend today because if they don't, the economy would collapse. The entire economy is running on debt. The companies that have borrowed money, they need customers to spend money with them because otherwise they can't pay back their debts. And if they can't pay back their debts, what happens? The economy collapses. So this is almost like a game where you have unlimited money, a game of Monopoly where you have unlimited money and only one person can access it. Let's say the banker. Only the banker can access it. What are the chances that the banker is going to lose? They can't. Unless the other players quit, the banker can't lose. And in this case, until people are willing to accept fiat currencies for their labor, for their time, their energy, their finite resource, the US dollar system can't be changed. People will continue to probably accept fiat currencies for the coming maybe decades. And by the time most people figure it out, Bitcoin will probably be a few $1,000,000. Most people will ignore Bitcoin until a million. They'll ignore Bitcoin until 10 million. One day you're going to wake up, your children are going to wake up, your grandchildren are going to wake up, and they're going to see that one Bitcoin is worth $100 million. And I'm not talking about the purchasing power here. I'm talking about the actual price of Bitcoin. The real value of Bitcoin may be slightly less. Let's say at that point, maybe the real value of Bitcoin is $10 million. But at some point in your lifetime, Bitcoin will be $100 million because this is just how money works. The first $100,000 was very difficult to achieve. It took 16 years. The next $100,000 will probably take a few years. Then the next million will probably take a few years. Then the next 10 million will probably take a few years because over time, as Bitcoin's price goes up, more people want it. More people discover that it's the best money in the world. And then on top of that, you're going to see real estate investors. You're going to see people who hold US dollars no longer wanting to hold US dollars. And you can see here the dollar is losing reserve currency status. It's down to 42% of global reserves, and gold is rapidly rising. Gold is going up as a savings tool while the dollar is decreasing because people are figuring it out. People don't want to save dollars anymore. They know that the dollar has no real substance. They know that the dollar can be printed. They know that most of dollars are just fake. They're a figment of our imagination. We believe that dollars are real. And that's the only reason why the current financial system has survived for as long as it has. And then on top of this, we have economists, legacy financial system economists who think that Bitcoin needs to fail. Otherwise, I have to face the reality that my theories are wrong. So they have this belief of how the world is supposed to work. They have this belief that governments should be able to print money and they should be able to get the system out of all of the problems that it's in that they've created initially by printing money in the first place. These economists believe that fake money must exist forever. So you can see here, one day Fama and other economists will have to face the harsh reality. Bitcoin is already turning the economic world upside down. Most economists just don't want to see it. The persistence of Bitcoin poses a challenge to established economic principles. I'm hoping it will bust. These are people who didn't figure it out early enough, and they're scared. They're worried. They think that if they didn't get in early enough, then they're never going to get in. Because if it doesn't, you have to start all over with monetary theory. That's what Bitcoin does. It breaks down all of the legacy principles of finance. It breaks down all of the legacy concepts of finance. If you understand Bitcoin, you're going to see how this happens. He suggests that if Bitcoin maintains its value long term, economists would need to fundamentally rethink their understanding of money and markets. And what this guy means here is in the past, people accepted blindly that governments should be able to print money. They should be able to add more money into the economy because in the past, we didn't have something like the Bitcoin network, which is neutral. It's immutable. It can't be changed. It can't be manipulated. It can't be coerced like individuals in the banking system. The people in the banking system can be coerced to decrease interest rates. For example, it seems like Donald Trump tried to bully Fed Chair Jerome Powell to decrease interest rates. And at some point, that will happen. At some point, they will have to decrease interest rates because otherwise they risk getting fired. They risk getting publicly shamed. They risk getting all of the blame of the economic system put on them. So let's go back to this picture here. My point here is that Bitcoin is currently just a small portion of the global wealth. At some point, the people who own the global wealth will want Bitcoin because it's so much better than every other asset. As an example, the people who own real estate today are eventually going to realize how much of a risk they're taking by holding onto real estate and not holding onto Bitcoin. Real estate requires that you take on loans, that you take on massive amounts of debt to buy the properties because the property's value is so high. Otherwise, you can't afford it. With real estate, you can't get away from property taxes. You're going to be paying property taxes no matter what. With Bitcoin, you don't need to take on loans. With Bitcoin, there's no real way to charge property taxes because nobody really knows that you own your Bitcoin. You can easily say that you lost it, you lost your private keys, and nobody can confirm that you have them or not. So, how would any jurisdiction charge you a property tax on your Bitcoin? You also have to deal with legal disputes with real estate. Let's say somebody trips and falls on your property, you have to pay them, they can sue you and all that stuff. There's maintenance and repairs, you have to constantly pay those no matter what. You have no choice but to pay them, whether you have tenants or not. If you have vacancies, you're in an even worse position because you're paying maintenance and repairs without somebody paying you cash flow so that you can pay for those maintenance and repairs. You also need to have a high yield savings account. You need to have some money on the side in case there are repairs and maintenance required with real estate. So all of these things add up and they make real estate a much worse investment than Bitcoin because none of these exist for Bitcoin. And then on top of that, you have tenants. These tenants can completely destroy your property. You have the tenant's income. What if the income of that tenant runs out? The tenant no longer has a job. How are they going to pay you? You have vacancies. You could have vacancies for months out of the year and you're paying for the property out of your own pocket. What if you can't afford the mortgage, maintenance, repairs, all of the things that come with owning real estate? Then you have market fluctuations. Even though people think that real estate is so stable, the prices do fluctuate. They constantly change. Prices can increase, they can decrease at any time. If you need to sell your property, you may not get the amount of money that you put in. And maybe you have to pay back the loan that you took on and you have to pay back more than you could get from the property. What kind of situation would that put you in? That would be terrible. You have to rely on your job to pay for your maintenance and repairs. You have to deal with property damage. On the other hand, Bitcoin doesn't have property damage. If you lose your job with Bitcoin, you can just sell some of your Bitcoin. You can sell a portion of it at any time. On the other hand, with real estate, if you can't get a loan from your bank against your property, then you have to sell the entire property. At some points, you may deal with negative cash flow, even with a great market. Maybe the rent that you're receiving isn't high enough because interest rates on the mortgage are too high. So you have to deal with negative cash flows. You have to deal with the risk of squatters. You have to deal with liability claims. You have to deal with potentially natural disasters and where insurance may not pay you for losing your property. You have to deal with liquidity risk. What if nobody in the market wants to buy a house because interest rates are too high? What if the employment rate is too low? You have to consider all of these factors when you buy real estate, when you hold on to real estate. You have all of these risks that don't come with Bitcoin. You have the risk of devaluation, so your property can just decrease in value over time, wear and tear. You have the risk of locations. What if a homeless encampment opens up right next to you? What's that going to do to the value of your property? And then we have war. What if war breaks out and your property is the only thing of value that you own? How are you going to carry that property around? You just lose everything that you worked for your entire life. You can almost think of each investment class as a bucket, and you can think of the money that's going into that bucket as a faucet. So if the faucet opens up and water starts coming out of that faucet, it goes into these buckets. It doesn't mean that that money is going to stay in those buckets. Now there's a brand new bucket where that bucket has an unlimited size. With real estate, there is a limit to how high prices can go because people need houses to live in. On the other hand, with Bitcoin, there's no real necessity to own it. So if somebody owns a Bitcoin and you don't truly lose out on, let's say, experiencing life. On the other hand, if somebody owns real estate and you don't, then you don't have shelter. And that's a massive problem. So, because of all those positives of Bitcoin, because of all of the negatives of real estate, and because of the fact that Bitcoin is capped at 21 million units, you're going to see that all the available capital in the world will eventually move into Bitcoin because it has all of the properties that we need money to have. Today, we're using substitutes as money, like real estate, like stocks, like bonds, like index funds. We're using all the substitutes that we don't really need to use as money. All of those things have been forced on us, essentially. We are told to buy real estate because that's just the right way to go. We're told to buy index funds because index funds are supposed to be stable. And that's the only way for us to really match inflation because the companies that we're buying are making money and they're giving that money to us as investors. So you may not believe it, and you may think that it's completely crazy to think that Bitcoin can ever go to $100 million, but believe it. Put in the time to study what Bitcoin is, to understand how Bitcoin works, especially if you own legacy assets. If you own a significant amount of wealth, you are going to be the one that's most impacted by Bitcoin going to $100 million because at some point, you're going to be able to buy a fraction of the amount of Bitcoin that you can buy today. And I think that this is extremely important to understand. If you can buy 10,000 Bitcoin today, soon you'll only be able to afford 1,000. If you can buy 1,000 Bitcoin today, soon you'll only be able to afford 100. If you can buy 100 Bitcoin today, soon you'll only be able to afford 10. This number will fall 90%, then it'll fall another 90%, and then it'll fall another 90% because the amount of Bitcoin that's available to be bought is limited. You can only buy a certain amount of Bitcoin. The rest of the Bitcoin is locked up and it's never going to be sold again. There's a certain portion of Bitcoin that's never going to be sold for dollars. So if you can buy Bitcoin today, let's say you can put in a certain number of hours of work today to buy Bitcoin, you'll be able to buy way more Bitcoin than somebody in the future will be able to buy for, let's say, 100 hours or 1,000 hours, a year of work, because the value of Bitcoin is literally infinite. It can keep going up forever. So buy what you can while you have this opportunity. Stack as many Satoshis as you possibly can, because at some point you're going to see that billionaires are going to want what you have. Everybody on earth will be a billionaire at some point because the US dollar has no substance. Everybody on earth can have $1 million. Everybody on earth can have $1 billion because more dollars can be printed. On the other hand, more Bitcoin can't be printed. You can't create more Bitcoin. Anybody could potentially buy one whole Bitcoin, but not everybody. Everybody could potentially buy 1 million Satoshis, which is 0.01 Bitcoin. But again, not everybody, because there's a limit to the amount of Bitcoin that exists. This is the first asset in history that's truly limited to a finite supply. So take the opportunity to buy as much Bitcoin while you can, because at some point, this opportunity is no longer going to exist. People are no longer going to want fiat currencies for their Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the only finite asset in the world. The only way that you'll be able to get more Bitcoin is to either give away goods and services or to give away your time, your labor, your energy for that Bitcoin. And that's exactly what our descendants are going to see. Our descendants are not going to be able to buy Bitcoin with fiat currencies because at that point, fiat currencies will be gone. Bitcoin will be so deeply ingrained in society, and people will realize that Bitcoin is the only real form of money in the world.